Look, it has been, it's a mess up here. It has been, well, in a few months, it will have been 20 years since I made my first webpage. And, yeah, for better or worse. I spent the better part of those 2 decades convincing people that the technology was not nearly as important as the experience that people have when using it. What's the problem? You want me to just switch back to yours? That's fine. I just was skeptical of the clicker.
I'm plugging back.
All right. So that experience, right, is something that we often refer to in the shorthand as design. And it feels like now, today, right, the nature of this conference, everything is an acknowledgement that design won. Like, we got it. All right. Cool. We get to design. You don't have to fight for design to have a seat at the table. We got our own table. We can invite people to it. Design, therefore, is no longer a competitive advantage. Oh my God, everybody's got it. We now need to look for what's next. And I believe the thing that's next after the competency of design is now this baseline and table stakes, is the culture of the teams that are making things. And I want to talk about that a little bit today, mostly by talking about cycling, because I love cycling. This is a picture I took not long ago of a ride we did after work. There's nothing better than going out on the bike. This is a picture of me getting measured for the bike that I ride now. I can't buy off the rack. So had them make me a bike. But look, I got these little sensors on each one of my joints, like in the John Cameron Avatar kind of thing. Motion capture, they're shooting an infrared camera at me and I'm looking at a computer screen with a little stick figure. And the guy is like dialing in the contraption that I'm riding on until we get the perfect fit. I only show you that because I thought it was so badass. Nothing to do with the talk. But cycling, not only do I do it, but I watch it. And I love watching professional cycling. Before every race, they will like go to the guy who's currently winning and say, "How will you do today?" And he will always say, "I will win." And there's a big, they spend the day riding their bikes up and down the mountains, and then inevitably somebody comes across the finish line in first place, and they go to that person, and they say, "Oh my God, you pedaled as if you had a motor on your bike. How did you do it? How did you get across the line first?" And they always say, inevitably, the team was very strong. Always. This, I think, mostly a false sense of humility. But a team is very strong. And that's weird because most people don't think of cycling as a team sport. They think of like everybody just riding like hell across as fast as they possibly can. But the reality is it's very much a team sport, works on teamwork. And all of that is because of this simple principle of physics, and that it is easier to be behind somebody when you're riding your bike, a lot easier. In fact, when you're riding your bike, it can be up to 40% easier if you trail behind the person in front of you. So the teams all have specialists that help the one person that they want the team leader to try to win. And they do that in a variety of ways. There's generally a couple of guys on the team that are very good at the ridiculous mountain stages. They look like jockeys. They weigh like 120 pounds and they ride their bike up the hill, dragging the guy behind him. There are also these incredibly fast sprinters, kind of look like racehorses, and they drag the guy across the start to the finish line. And then you have all of these guys that are just young cyclists that hope to someday be the team leaders, and they will do anything the teams ask them to, including generally going back to the car to get drinks for everybody, right? And carrying those drinks back to the team leaders. And often, geez, it's a tough job. I understand the guy was okay after this, so no, not a huge deal. But cycling is a dangerous sport as well. Anyway, I love it because you can get right in there with they had a bike race in San Francisco with all the pros, and they went past my house. And it's a very personal sport. It's a sport that's changed a lot during the years. They don't smoke as much. They just use a variety of other substances during the races. But it's amazing, so check it out if you can. But I want to go back to that one line from the beginning there. This idea that the team was very strong. I think about that a lot because it's teams, the teams that we have around us, the teams that many of you probably lead if you're the ones here at this conference. I look for inspiration about that all the time, and I found a great quote in an interview from Steven Soderbergh, the director, talking about what it's like on his sets. And he says that some people believe tension is a good creative tool, and he says that I'm not one of those people. I'm not trying to control these people. But in fact, he says, I try to keep the environment pretty relaxed and focused. That is something that I really, really appreciate and I really like. And that's what I consider one of the key things for a team is to have a creative environment. And I don't mean just the physical place, although that's good and important for morale and a functioning team. But I mean these sort of less tangible things like shared values and safety and camaraderie and trust. An environment that fosters creativity, where a team can function together and feel like they can be their absolute best and not be at risk of politics or backstabbing or ridicule. And so I invest a lot in trying to get teams to work as creatively as they possibly can, because the goals that I want as somebody who leads teams, and that many people who leads teams want, are things like getting the most amazing work we can from them very inexpensively and very quickly. And most of the presentations today were about those three things: great work, right, as cheaply as possible, with as little risk as possible, as quickly as we can. So I wanted to talk a little bit then about this idea of momentum. And we often think about momentum in the startup world as one of our key differentiators. We can go faster than bigger companies, right? Trust me, I'm at a big company right now. It's really hard to go fast there. Really hard. And startups can go so much faster. But this is how we often think about momentum. And in fact, we are of a culture of technology and engineering and data, right? And so we tend to think about the performance of our teams like this. Right? This is a Google image search for velocity, right? And agile velocity. What it shows is ways of quantifying how well our team is performing. And we tend to see things like this, right? Our team is performing like this, and it looks like something really bad happened in week 14, right? That can't be good. It's this huge anomaly. Look at the dip. But come on, like, what, don't people get tired? Don't people need to slow down? Don't they need to think and maybe not write code for a while? That's never reflected in stuff like this. And when I started thinking about that, when we were looking at all the agile development processes and the methodologies for that stuff, it reminded me of some of the history I learned early on about Frederick Taylor and Taylorism. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but he was the guy at the Industrial Revolution, at the turn of the century, that was kind of the first person to optimize work. Right? Because we were putting people into factories and hoping that they would be kind of part of the machine and do the work as efficiently as possible. And he was the guy walking around with the stopwatch and the clipboard, making sure everybody was always being as efficient as possible. And one of the things that he found out was, while he was doing that, is that he was measuring how quickly he could get these guys to bring iron from the ship up to the factory, right, to produce more content. And he realized that one of the very first requirements for a man who is fit to handle iron is that he resemble in his mental makeup the ox. That was the best guy that he could find, the ox-like guy to carry this iron. The problem, he said, is that the workman who's best suited to handling the iron is unable to understand the real science of doing the work. That is, the strongest guys were too stupid to get better at what they needed to do. So he invented a thing called a manager. And that would be a person who was smart and didn't want to actually do the work and could make all the dumb, strong guys do the work and keep them efficient. And so you ended up with factories like this, with people who were not quite smart enough to get better at their work, being watched over by the guy over there in the corner. You see him kind of hunched over, and he's writing on a piece of paper, the manager. And it led to these kind of conditions, which thankfully in our very progressive and modern age, we don't really face too much anymore. But sorry, maybe it's too soon. But here's the thing. We lead creative teams, right? And I will be the first to admit that the people on my team are way smarter than me. That's why I hired them. They are better at what they do than I could ever be, and they understand it better than I ever could. Yet I need to motivate them, right? To provide both that sort of logical progression of velocity and things like that, as well as the much more emotional vision and inspiration, right? And that's where you get into a situation of trying to balance those two things, the logic and the passion, frankly. And that was Kirk's whole job, is to take that data coming at him from both sides and parse it together into the solution. Happens the same in cycling, where you have the team leader, that passionate guy who throws himself into the sport, and the guy in the back in the car following them in the race that's calling all the shots and doing all the logistics and planning. So instead, maybe of thinking momentum as only this, maybe we can find a way to think about it a little more progressively, right? As always moving forward, regardless of the pace that we're going, right? And measuring that as how your team feels as well as how they are performing. So I want to talk about just 3 quick ways, some tricks that I think work pretty well. So let me show you them. I actually, even though I have very creative teams, and you all do too, and even though I'm in a big company now and it seems like all we ever do is have meetings, I want to talk about a few meetings that I found have really worked for us. Normally I think about meetings like this. If you can't read it in the back, it's extolling all the virtues of meetings, like being able to see people and show charts and feel important, point at things with a stick, eat donuts, the practical alternative to work. It can be very true. I find now I've got now this sort of 80-20 balance at my big company job, in which 80% of the time I talk about the work and 20% of the time I actually get to do it, which I find a little frustrating. When we were in a startup, we had probably a 90 to 10% rule that we followed, of 90% doing the work and 10% talking about it, but that was important. One of the ways we did that was through this sort of anti-meeting, and that was the chat room, and I can't recommend that enough. We started with Campfire, we went through HipChat. Now we use Slack, and it's fantastic. I would highly recommend it. But the reason I like it is not just because it's fun, but also because it does a thing that I consider, that I call ambient accountability. We built this little robot, which is honestly a set of scripts that talks to APIs, that takes all the information people need to do their jobs, aggregates it, and flows it into the chat room, such that you get things like the code deploys and pull requests and support tickets, and whether your thing passed the continuous integration and revenue events and all of that kind of stuff. And obviously the latest animated GIFs, because this is, and that is fun, right? But it's also a method of peer review, right? You do a release, you put some code out there, or you close a bunch of tickets, and the team responds in ways that make you feel good, right? And you get things like this. This is a typical day in a chat room for the TypeKit team. And that's fantastic, right? Like that is a type of feedback. That is ambient accountability. That is, I'm doing good work, the team is telling me that, we feel connected. And that's part of building trust for a solid creative environment. And if you do your work really, really well, you can get the best animated GIF of all time from anybody, which is, of course, the Chuck Norris thumbs up. Who wouldn't want to have that? Let me give you one other sort of, here's a meeting that we would have once or twice a week that we liked a lot, and that is our product review. This is actually a picture of Frank Lloyd Wright's conference room, where he would get together with all of his students and they would show off their work and they would discuss it. And that's what we do frequently. We put our work up and we talk about it together in structured ways, which is really important. The unstructured types of design reviews that I used to participate in at Google, I think you guys have probably experienced this too. I sat in those famous design reviews that Marissa would hold, and they often felt like this, where the designer with the beautiful idea of the clay pigeon of an idea would launch it into the air, and everybody would just fire away at it, and that was our design review. Instead, we don't even call it design review, we call it product review, because we're talking about the product and the decision making that we did. So here's some tips if you want to do this. Have somebody put their work up, but when you give feedback, well, first of all, in our company, it was always an optional attendance, but mandatory participation. I don't consider meetings like a place where you just sort of check your email and listen. If you're there, it's work. We're doing work together at the same time. That's what the meetings were. But these were not a forum for expressing opinions. I don't care about opinions. Let me give you an example. This is a bad piece of feedback. I don't like that blue. This is a better piece of feedback. Why is that blue? Look what we did. We just turned it around, and now I'm asking you for your decision-making process, right? Tell me what went into the decisions that you're making here. Or even better, is color even important here, right? So it is a working session, really, for group problem solving that's either convergent or divergent. And that is by defining at the beginning of the meeting, right? That I want to have a divergent meeting. That means we have a problem we're trying to solve. Let's get all the brainstorming, limitless possibility, anything like improv. I always say yes to any idea, and let's get them all out there. That's great. Versus a divergent meeting, which is, a convergent meeting, which is very much evaluating feasibility, acknowledging the constraints, right? That's where, like, I have taken all your ideas and I did a bunch of work and now I have one. Is this one going to work? And switching those around or getting them confused is what leads to so much frustration when we're talking about our products, where all I want is to know whether the thing that I've done can work, and all you want to do is come up with more and more and more ideas. Or I need a bunch of ideas, and all we're doing is shooting them down right away. So defining that right away is great with a team you trust. And the best way to build trust is to build design vocabulary so that we all have the same, essentially the same good taste, right? So the more exposure to users, in so many of the talks today we talked about that, either through data or bringing them in. The talk you guys just gave was fantastic doing that. But it leads to better design instincts from everybody on the team when they see people using the products. And likewise, we share good design all the time, often in the chat room. But going to a place like Behance, which is one of the products Adobe bought recently, but looking at beautiful design and sharing that with the team gives people a better design vocabulary so that we can all talk together about what we like and what we don't. So let me talk about this last meeting that we do, which is one that we never really want to have, which is the postmortem when something goes wrong. Because things go wrong all the time, right? We have a lot of code and a lot of code deploys that go out. And that means that we are pushing live code into the production environment multiple times a day. And sometimes, when that happens, really bad things happen. Like sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, like the site might go down. And it is a very human trait to think, who did this? Who screwed up the site? Who is responsible for this? To find the villain, right? Somebody made an error and has broken the thing. Let's find them and punish them so that it never happens again. And this is called the fundamental attribution error. This is a thing that happens when people confuse the attributes of somebody for the circumstances in which they were operating in, right? And we all do it. A much better thing to do is to follow this guy's advice. His name is Sakichi Toyoda. He was big in Japan in the the electronics revolution after World War II, and he would ask why something was going wrong in a factory, and he would do it 5 times, the 5 whys. Look it up. It's a really good methodology. Here's an example of how to get to the circumstances in which somebody made an error, right? Because nobody thinks they're going to be actually taking the site down when they push the button. They always think they're doing the right thing. So Jeff Bezos goes to one of his factories, and he sees that an employee has injured his thumb, and he asks why, and they say because it got caught in the conveyor belt, so he keeps pressing on. Why did that happen? Well, he was chasing after his bag. Well, why was he chasing it? Well, he put it on the conveyor belt when it started up. Well, why did he do that? Well, he was using the conveyor belt as a table. Well, why was he doing that? Because he had no place to store his personal belongings. He did not have what he needed, right? And therefore, an injury occurred. So by getting lockers, people didn't get hurt. That sort of thing. You can do that with what you're doing by asking why 5 times. I would read more about that, but it's really worked for us so that people feel safe that if they do make a mistake, we can uncover it so nobody else will make that mistake and they are not blamed, but held accountable. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was to sort of put this in context for you and all your teams, right? And that's what this concept that I've been reading about recently, it's from Japanese culture. It's called ikigai. And it is this idea of, that has been studied in huge studies in Japan, tens of thousands of people longitudinally over a long time, in which people who can clearly identify their reason for being, like why they're alive, what they're doing here, tend to have fewer cardiac arrests and a longer lifespan. Like quantifiably, don't die as young because they understand why they're there. I found that super interesting, and actually if you kind of zoom out, this happens kind of in every culture. We always have this idea of meaning of life, right? A European understanding of the reason, of the Christian understanding of the divine will, or the enlightenment and nirvana of many Eastern schools of thought. This idea of why we're here. And that's something I think about a lot with our teams. The more we know why we're here and what we're doing, and have a shared understanding of that, the better we function. I have a couple of kids, and we were reading the original Winnie the Pooh. It was the good one before Disney got it, and I highly recommend it. And there's this quote, this passage in it that I really kind of resonated. So when you wake up in the morning, this is Piglet talking, says, when you wake up in the morning, Pooh, what's the first thing you say to yourself? And the pig says, what's for breakfast? And he asks Piglet, what do you say, Piglet? And Piglet says, well, I say, I wonder what's going to happen that's exciting today. And then the bear says, well, that's the same thing. But this is probably, I think, the best thing that you can bring to your creative environment, right? Is this daily sense of momentum through excitement. Like, come on, what's the exciting thing that we're going to do today, right? We have put all of this investment into everything we can to build trust amongst one another. Let's build some amazing stuff, right? Because we keep talking about, when we talk about momentum and speed, we talk about the rate of change of technology. Technology changes so fast, we say, but that's abstract. Technology doesn't really change fast, right? We change it. So it's sort of our responsibility to do this with our teams, because we have a huge responsibility in the technology that we build. And that is one of the reasons why I get excited about building all this stuff. And I hope it is for you too. So that's what I have to say today. And thanks for sticking with us all day. This is fantastic, and good luck, and see you outside for beers.